Clucky just got hit with reality. One day, your gasoline is cheaper than dirt. The next day, you have to empty your bank account and sell your car just to afford the gas to drive it to the other side of town. I know what you're thinking. Why? Why does the price of gas change every time I blink? Who's doing this to me? Is it magic? Is it a curse from the universe? I assure you, it isn't magic. Gas prices change frequently, violently, and seemingly without reason. But there is a factual explanation. Before we can talk about the complex global web of gasoline, we must understand the absolute bedrock of all economics. The golden rule of the market: supply and demand. Let's define our terms. Supply is exactly how much of a product is available. In this case, one single terrified earthworm. Demand, on the other hand, is how much the consumers want that product. When you have high demand and low supply, what happens? Absolute financial chaos. High demand and low supply increase prices to astronomical levels. It's a bidding war. But what happens if we reverse the scenario? Here we have incredibly high supply and absolutely zero demand. You couldn't pay this consumer to eat another worm. Because there's so much supply and no demand, the price drops to practically nothing. Gasoline prices follow this exact same principle. When the consumers of the world want to drive but there isn't enough gasoline to go around, the price goes up. When the market is flooded with gasoline and nobody is driving, the price goes down. Hold on a second. Where do you think you're going? While the rule of supply and demand is simple, the reality of how that supply and demand is manipulated, processed, and taxed is a labyrinth of global bureaucracy. In fact, there are four main factors that determine the exact price you pay at the feed trough. Factor number one, the cost of crude oil. Crude oil is the primary ingredient in gasoline. It's the raw, unrefined resource that makes the entire global economy go. Because it is the fundamental base ingredient, crude oil makes up for the absolute largest portion of the price of gas. When you pay for gasoline, you're mostly paying for this raw crude oil. Now, oil prices fluctuate wildly. Why? Because of global supply and demand. And who influences the supply? The cow cartel. These cows sit on massive underground reserves of crude oil. Because they control the resource, they hold the power. They heavily influence global supply levels simply by deciding how much to pump out of the ground. By lowering the supply, the oil-producing nations ensure that the demand from consumers remains desperate. Less supply equals higher prices. But these decisions aren't the only thing that affects the supply of crude oil. The universe is at a chaotic, unpredictable place. Global events constantly affect oil supply and prices. Natural disasters, like hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, can wipe out pumping infrastructure in an instant. The pumps stop, the supply drops, the prices, they spike. And let's not forget political instability. If two major oil-producing countries get into a geopolitical standoff, trade embargoes are enacted, sanctions are dropped, and the crude oil stops flowing. The global market panics, supply drops, prices spike. So, if an international conflict breaks out in the Eastern Hemisphere, your wallet immediately hurts in the Western Hemisphere. But that's factor one. Factor number two, refining costs. You see, you can't just take that raw black crude oil, pour it directly into your car, and expect it to run. If you do, your car will explode. And you don't want to get blown up with your car. Believe me, crude oil must be processed into usable gasoline. It must be boiled, cracked, treated, and blended. This highly complex industrial chemistry happens right here at the refineries, or as we call it, the big churner. Now, you might be thinking, well, if we need so much gasoline, just build more big churners. If only it were that simple. There's a severely limited number of refineries in the world. Building a new one takes billions of dollars, decades of planning, and getting past municipal zoning boards. Because there's a limited number of refineries, they act as a massive bottleneck for supply. They operate at near maximum capacity all the time, which means if anything goes wrong, it's an economic disaster. Refinery shutdowns, whether they're planned for routine maintenance or completely unplanned because of an accident on the factory floor, drastically reduce gasoline production. The oil-producing nations might be pumping plenty of crude oil out of the ground, but if the refineries can't process it, the supply of finished gasoline plummets. And what happens when supply plummets? That's right, the prices increase. But wait, the refineries have another major hurdle: seasonal fuel blends. Gasoline is not the same all year round. In the summer, when the sun beats down and the asphalt gets hot, standard winter gasoline can evaporate into the atmosphere, causing smog and pollution. To prevent this, the government mandates that the refineries produce a special summer blend. This blend requires different, much more expensive chemical ingredients. The refining process for the summer blend takes longer and actually yields less total fuel per barrel of crude oil. Because the ingredients are pricier and the yield is lower, seasonal fuel blends significantly affect refining costs. But the real kicker is the transition period. To switch from winter to summer blends, refineries have to temporarily shut down their systems to completely purge the old fuel. This seasonal transition causes a temporary dip in overall supply, which, you guessed it, causes temporary price increases every single spring. Just when you think you're safe, the transition hits your wallet. By now you're thinking, there are way too many factors influencing the prices. And you're right, there are. However, that's not it. There's more. Factor number 3, distribution and marketing. Once the refineries have successfully processed the crude oil, it doesn't magically teleport into your car's gas tank. It has to be moved. Cue another bill added to your gas price. The transportation of gasoline via pipelines, ships, and trucks adds a massive layer of cost. The transportation industry doesn't work for free. And here's a simple, undeniable fact of geography. Distance from refineries can heavily influence the price. If your local gas station is right next door to the refinery, transportation is a breeze and costs remain low. If you live on the other side of the country, the tanker trucks have to drive for 3 days to get to you. Increased transportation costs will inevitably raise your gas prices. And let's not blame the poor business owner who runs your local gas station. Operational costs for gas stations contribute significantly to the final price. The owner has to pay for the glowing neon sign, the commercial real estate lease, the credit card processing fees, and the teenage ducklings who work the register. Which brings us to factor number 4, the one factor that makes every single consumer groan in perfect unison: taxes. Federal and state gas taxes are baked directly into the price you see on the side. You don't see them added at the register. They're already there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for you. Now, tax rates vary wildly by state. If you live in one state, the L takes a massive chunk of your money. If you live in a different state, the L takes a slightly smaller chunk of money. But why do we pay these taxes? Where do the dollars go? Taxes are meant to fund the essential infrastructure, like roads and bridges. Without them, your car would be stuck in a massive pothole. So while gas taxes remain relatively stable, they certainly don't jump up and down daily like crude oil does. They form a significant immovable portion of the overall price. So we have the oil-producing countries controlling the crude, the refineries processing the gasoline, the transport industry hauling the tankers, and the government taking its tax. Is that everyone? Is that all that controls the price? No, because we have to talk about you, the consumer. Yes, you. Let's talk about seasonal demand changes. Gasoline demand increases exponentially in the summer due to travel and vacations. Every consumer in the country wants to take a road trip. The demand skyrockets, and as we learned with our friend the earthworm, higher demand typically leads to higher prices. Conversely, what happens in the winter? Winter generally brings much lower demand. Nobody wants to drive their car in a blizzard. Because demand drops, the price drops. But the seasons aren't the only thing that changes your behavior. That brings us to economic conditions. When the economy is strong, it dramatically increases fuel demand. Strong economic performance means more jobs, more construction, and more business activity. Delivery drivers are driving back and forth, workers are commuting to their offices, and everyone has a little extra cash in their pockets. More jobs and business activity lead directly to higher gasoline consumption. But remember the golden rule of the worm. Increased demand during strong economies can ironically raise prices. When everyone has money and everyone is driving, the supply is strained, and the price of gasoline goes up. A booming economy is a double-edged sword that cuts right through your wallet. Okay, so now your head is spinning from all the people keeping their cut in your gas prices. Fair enough, mine's too. Now, we return to the eternal question. Who controls the gas prices? Is it the oil-producing cartels hoarding the crude? Is it the transport companies charging for delivery? Or the government taking its tax for the bridge? Or is it you, the consumer, demanding to drive to the beach in July? The truth is, it's all of them. And it's much bigger than just your local gas station. Oil prices are affected by international decisions and events. A supply disruption anywhere in the world impacts global prices everywhere in the world. If a refinery goes offline in Asia, the global supply of finished gasoline drops, and the consumers in America pay the price. Gas prices reflect a massive, interconnected, highly sensitive global supply and demand system. So the next time you see that number jump up by 10 cents overnight, don't yell at the poor business owner behind the register. Yell at the oil producers. Yell at the refiners. Yell at the politicians. Yell at the hurricane in the ocean, the geopolitical strife across the globe, and perhaps yell at yourself for wanting to take a road trip on the 4th of July. Screw it! I'm doing cardio. A wise economic choice. Until next time, keep your tanks full, your budgets guarded, and your portfolios diversified.